Anthem 2 could have been a reality, and nobody at Bioware believed in Bioware magic, according to some comments and even some articles coming out about Anthem. I want to get to an article in a second from PC Gamer just about what could have been and why it's so uniquely frustrating when really, really good games seemingly can't get out of the gate. Funny thing about Anthem was I felt that they nailed so much of what makes a game enjoyable. Good content loop, creative mechanics. It was actually a game that you really couldn't play anywhere else, a sort of living world, ongoing looter where you were in these mech suits, and I thought that the content loop was very satisfying. Many people continue to kind of go back to Anthem and look at the footage of the Ranger especially and say, man, that would be perfect for an Iron Man game, and maybe some of that can be repurposed because we do know an Iron Man game is on the horizon, but Anthem was sort of stopped short before it could become what everybody hoped it would someday turn into. Anybody who's looked at the actual stats on what happened with the game, it's incredibly frustrating that in pre-production, so many lack of decisions from the leadership at the company, just sort of pushing the game out even when it wasn't ready because the developers had to scramble to build it in about 18 months. Actually, recent tweets indicating it was 15 months, and this sounded very similar recently when we read through what happened with Redfall and that they believed in arcane magic, and leadership just once again being, I would argue, pretty stupid with how to manage these projects. And we have an article from PC Gamer that says ex-Bioware dev says that nobody there believed in Bioware magic, and Anthem 2 was really fun when EA canned it. If you weren't paying attention to Anthem near the end of its life, they were sort of bringing it back around. They were investing in changing everything. They had drawn up sort of mock-ups of new UI, new approaches to the loot, and it really felt like it was going to get its second chance and maybe even be considered almost a sequel in and unto itself, kind of like you've seen in No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky turned itself, I believe, into the sequel to itself. The original No Man's Sky that launched is so far disconnected from just how far the game has come that it essentially is its own sequel, and I think Anthem could have done that. One of the reasons I've always argued that is it just felt so good to be in the game. If the gameplay loop and the game itself wasn't fun, I don't think anybody would have cared. I think very early apathy and rejection of the game would have settled in. I argued that in my monologue about Diablo 4, that I believe people will come back to Diablo 4 if there's ever an exodus or if people get frustrated with the seasonal model, which is something I predicted, but I think people will come back when a game feels really good. And it's frustrating because Anthem did feel really good. So let's maybe read a little bit about what could have been in this article from PC Gamer. And it says here that during development, management was putting in gating mechanics to lengthen the time it took to complete the story. Now, they were likely doing that because just the absolute muddled way this thing was thrown together and development, due to the bad management, due to the bad leadership, it's not surprising that they were trying to lengthen the story because that was basically all the game had. They had decided to do an ongoing game and didn't really build it for that. And funny enough, bad games coming out are bringing Anthem to the forefront of discussions with Redfall and now Lord of the Rings Gollum. We're seeing people tweeting about Anthem because there were just a lot of sort of trends on Twitter. Hey, tweet about your worst game or, things you learned, etc. So, last week saw the release of Lord of the Rings Gollum, and it didn't go too well. While PC Gamer Review found the game had some redeeming features, technical issues on other platforms contributed to the game receiving some terrible review scores, to the extent that the studio felt the need to issue an apology and some bug squashing promises. It also led to a moment of developer solidarity on social media as people who've worked on games that didn't come together shared their stories of such projects. In light of what happened with Redfall, I've actually sort of called on the corporate disconnect and the really bad leadership of these companies to be replaced. I think a lot of these companies have talented developers working under horrible leadership, and you're actually harming the industry, you're harming these companies, the products, as well as consumer confidence with the whole, oh, there'll be a magical moment, there'll be Bioware magic or arcane magic, just shove the content out. So I think it's good that devs are sort of maybe starting to speak out about everything everything they learned and also just the reality of what happened to some of these games. One particular story was shared at some length and will make sad reading for any Iron Man fanaticist out there. Developer Ian Satterdahlin is currently a lead producer at Mythical Games, before which he worked in various roles at Crystal Dynamics, Blizzard, Riot, and then Bioware at the time of Anthem's extremely rushed development. A lot of people don't realize that about Anthem. They'll try to blame everything on EA, but what they don't realize is it was really, really bad leadership at Bioware that led to that game's demise. You should really go read the article from Jason Schreier about it. He sort of outlines everything that happened. The fact that we got the game we did in about 15 months of development time just shows how amazing the game could have been if BioWare had, 4 years, maybe 5 years to build it. I mean, look what they did in 15 months. It's kind of remarkable. Anthem was once the next big thing from BioWare, or that's how it was sold by publisher EA anyway, but on launch felt unfinished, most notably lacking an endgame, but with a host of other problems. It did have a lot of bugs and crashes in the first couple of weeks, which is understandable once you find out they built the thing in barely over a year. BioWare went into triage mode on Anthem shortly afterwards, with the plan of morphing into something called Anthem Next, or Anthem 2, a full-scale rework of the game, which got well underway before EA pulled the plug. Now, I don't know if it got well underway. I had people pushing back against me on this when I claimed that. I said, man, they were really getting some traction and some reception. I had people saying, no, those were just mock-ups. It was a small team. They hadn't really made any progress. So I'm interested to see if they actually had done quite a bit. I learned a lot on this project, said Satterdahlin. We knew it wasn't ready, as this game was literally created in 15 months, which is unheard of for a game of that scope. Anthem 2 would have been great. I hate hearing that. Like, just that sentence alone makes me feel so sad, because I really liked Anthem. I thought it showed a lot of promise. Many found the 15-month figure nigh unbelievable. Satterdahlin went on to clarify that lots of concept and world-building work was done before this period, but, quote, I'm sure 18 months before ship is when the first level and Ranger Javelin were started. 15 months is when I started and the Ranger was not finished, and the world crashed every 2 to 3 minutes. See, a lot of people don't realize this, that they changed the name, they changed the game type. It was going to be like a survival game with, like, weather systems, and then last minute the name was changed, and then they didn't get to work, as you can see here, on it until about a year and a half before it came out. And even in those first 3 months of development, they were clearly having problems. One of the developers in the original article described the engine as having razor blades, just a very, very tough thing. They had to build the flying mechanics from scratch because they weren't there. It wasn't an engine sort of built for the game that they were trying to have. The story is a familiar one, not in a good way. Satterdahlin says EA had their reasons for waiting to hit the ship date, but it was the dev team that had to pay the price. Yeah, as it always is. As it always is. Like, go read the Bloomberg piece on Redfall. It's the devs are the ones that pay the price for terrible leadership and just corporate disconnect. If this stuff doesn't get fixed, you're going to have a talent deficit at some of these studios, maybe even in the industry itself. The price being 90-hour work weeks for 15 months. Quote, it wasn't sustainable and not even a position we should have been in. I'm fine now, but not without damage. Contributed to the cost of my marriage, and I needed therapy for a while after that endeavor. Now, listen, nobody should make light of this. They really, really shouldn't. As somebody who's gone through my own stressful situation and what it does to your health and your psychology, what it can do to your relationships is a real thing, okay? Anxiety, blood pressure, real serious issues with sleep, which this just actually starts to create a downward spiral of your health, and all sorts of things. Weight gain, alcoholism, all sorts of things can come from being overworked and stressed and put into these situations. So it's incredibly sad to read that this happened, and this is probably one person. You have to remember, In the original article about this, there were people that were taking like leaves of absence, like psychological breakdowns because they were being so overworked. And not surprising, I mean, 19-hour work weeks for 15 months. My least favorite thing when we see these sorts of things is people that say, oh, that's every industry. I work hard, suck it up. Yeah, well, if you've accepted being treated like a piece of garbage, that's your own personal choice. But people should not be put in situations like this. It's terrible for your people. It's terrible for their mental health. And the damning irony is that it's terrible for the product. You actually get less production, you get less efficient work, you get more mistakes. It is such a depreciating returns system. It's like slipping down a spiral staircase. You just can't get your footing. I can't believe companies are still doing this. Saturdaylin mentions various unpleasant aspects of the contemporary industry, such as fan overreaction to the finished product, leading to some members of the team receiving threats, including death threats, the rough process of working with Frostbite, and the morale constantly dropping because of the vicious cycle the team was locked in. And this is just something that people should consider when they act like these developers are entitled or they're crying or whining. These are real people, and this really affects their lives, and it's awful that it's not even their fault most of the time. They basically have to grin and bear the bad decisions of upper management and leadership, and then they're the ones who take the brunt of the abuse from the public. The real culprits are the guys at the top who probably made a bunch of money anyway, and and a lot of them are probably getting ready to retire. Hopefully a lot of them retire. They're all garbage at their jobs. Anthem did get delayed at one point, but this was absolutely essential as it was missing key features, in something of a technical state, suffered from scope creep, and there was no endgame. While at Kotaku, Jason Schreier published this investigation into Anthem's troubled development, which Saturdaylin says was 100% accurate at some point in development. So if you've never read that article, I again would encourage you to check that out. It is eerily similar to some of the things we heard about Redfall. More troubling is how management decided to address the game's lack of content and endgame. Quote, I think the crappiest part about this, besides no endgame and replayability, was that during development, management was putting in gating mechanics to lengthen the time it took to complete the story, said Saturdaylin. Quote, if I recall, it was removed from the final version after backlash from the devs. I was going to say the story went rather quickly. I didn't encounter any gating, any time gating. There were time gating mechanics for sort of the daily, there were like these quests and like ongoing things, but the actual story itself, you could just beeline right through fairly quickly. So it seems, yeah, the devs were like, get this crap out of here. The whole point of his comments, however, is that the team working on Anthem was nevertheless proud of what they achieved in the time given, and certain aspects of the game were undeniably good. I agree with that. I will never, ever not be impressed with what they pulled off. It will always make me sad that they didn't have a full 4 to 5 window time to develop this game, because what they did in 18 months was truly remarkable. Take that and multiply that by the remaining years they didn't get, and what they could have made could have been truly special. We'd still be playing that game today, I bet. Quote, it was a great team effort to get the controls how we shipped when we went through many iterations, and it was super rough in the beginning. I know the team was really happy where the controls landed too. We actually took a lot of feedback from EA Game Changers. Yeah, they did. I was one of those people. We've provided a ton of feedback when we went to the Capture event. And then there was an event later on at EA Play. It was in 2019. I was there to do main stage hosting for E3, and I went to the EA Play and sort of the behind-the-scenes thing. It got a little hijacked by some YouTuber who just kept talking about his channel. It was kind of funny, but kind of not. And my main point back then was they were too focused on content, and I kept saying they needed to focus on vision. Where is the game going? What kind of game is this going to become? You know, compartmentally adding content at that point did virtually nothing for Anthem. And I was glad to see that they were sort of doing that. They were sort of stripping everything down and saying, Anthem next, or Anthem 2 or whatever, let's start from scratch. That's what the game needed. So I was thrilled when I started seeing them move in that direction, because I kept stressing, content is not enough. You don't have a vision. You don't have an identity as a game. You have a great core content loop, and that's it. That's all you had at that point. In terms of the game's eventual release, quote, "It was definitely above my pay grade for the decisions of this isn't ready," said Saturdaylin. "I think everyone was just backed into a corner, and I have an assumption that if we didn't release Anthem, Bioware would have been dissolved." Wow. Well, that's always fun to work under those conditions, too. I'm sure that really helped with all of the psychological problems people experienced. Going on to something spicy, which is actually far from the spiciest thing he said, Saturdaylin does make the point that he wasn't privy to such senior decisions, and that, while it was easy to blame EA for what happened with Anthem, Bioware also had to carry the can. Quote, "I actually don't think it was all EA's fault. A developer and publisher is supposed to be a healthy relationship of trust and transparency. It was a two-way street, which I don't think was satisfied on either side." Yeah, and a lot of people were quick to blame EA. And when you go read the article, it doesn't sound like it was EA at all. As for the positioning of the game as a Destiny competitor, yeah, Bioware wasn't under any illusions about that. Quote, "I think maybe in the public eye it may have been positioned to be a Destiny killer. It came up in conversations internally, but we didn't have the muscle or know-how to take on Destiny. It was squashed very fast because that's a lot of pressure. Let's walk before running." And I honestly think trying to be a Destiny killer is stupid. You build your own game, have your own content loop. I still firmly believe there are better looter shooters on the horizon. Somebody right now, I believe, is probably building the next best looter shooter. And if people would stop looking at Destiny and start looking at their own game, you could learn from the ongoing content structure and success, but I wouldn't try to beat that game because I don't think you want that audience playing your game anywhere. That audience is ravenous and they're kind of nasty. So I wouldn't target that audience for anything if you want your game to be successful. They're going to come, rip the game to shreds, say it's not good enough, and probably walk away if they come expecting like a Destiny killer. For what it's worth, he says, most people at Bioware didn't believe in Bioware magic. I just laugh at it all now, though. It's sad to see that is one of the key things in people's minds that tie to Anthem. Well, yeah, and in the wake of the Redfall article, it's like arcane magic. It's like, those are just dumb things that corporate level people say, right? I remember a guy saying no excuses, just results when I worked for AT&T. The guy was an idiot. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know how to motivate people. And when you hear like arcane magic or Bioware magic, you can just picture like the completely disconnected from the team and disconnected from the people that are working on the project. Just some dumb blowhard who wants to walk in the room and, I don't know, tell everybody it's going to be okay. Just keep working hard. Keep your nose to the grindstone kind of a thing. After Anthem, of course, came the Great Rescue mission that was ultimately never to be. On Anthem 2.0 or Anthem Next, he says, the game was really fun and was going in the right direction. The team had hit a really great milestone when EA canned it. It was a different development team driving Anthem 2.0. The team were gutted when it was canceled. See, this pushes back against that narrative of people telling me that, oh, they had just drawn up mock-ups. No, it sounds like they hit a great milestone and had a new team working on it. That's really unfortunate. That is not what a lot of people thought. A lot of people thought that game was basically only in its conceptual phase, the sort of second iteration of Anthem, the rejuvenation project, if you will. Quote, my assumption was there was just too much baggage from Anthem 1 or costs involved to get Anthem 2 out, said Saturdaylin. Anthem Next was Anthem 2. It was definitely real. Oh, this just is more heartbreaking the more I read. It would honestly be interesting to see Respawn take this IP, he says. I think Bioware could do it again, though, with the right direction Anthem 2 was going. Yeah, I'd love to see Respawn take it. They know how to make a really good shooter, and they know how to manage big mechs like they did in Titanfall 1 and 2. The developer spent a good while replying to comments about Anthem and thanking fans who enjoyed the game regardless of the issues. He reckons NDAs will prevent the full story ever coming out, though it sounds like we already have the broad outlines. And yes, they illustrate development is hard. I would argue it's not just hard. I would argue it's hard when you have stupid people in management and leadership. I think that's one of the most common problems right now, is you have people in positions that shouldn't be there. They either sort of got there because of their history in the company, or they've been there for a really, really long time. And a lot of these guys are completely clueless. They don't understand what it takes to get games out in the modern landscape. And I think they're just dialing in old tropes and old corporate idiocy, honestly, that may have worked 10 or 20 years ago, but it ain't working now. Look at the games coming out and how they get treated, and look at the financial damage they cause. Quote, it's great to see players passionate about what Anthem could have been, and Saturdaylin. There's a lot of nuance, and it's hard to convey everything in tweets. Please be nice to each other and bring positivity. Life is too short. I mean, it reads like a sad tale of what could have been, and Anthem's always that game that I wonder if they could make that comeback. It would be the game that everybody would take interest in. You put it in the right engine, you give it to the right developer, and I think an Anthem 2 could not just make headlines. I think it could make some splash. It could make an effect in the world. People, oh, let's go play this game. It could be successful. Let me know what you think. Do you think Anthem could ever come back, or are we just going to see it sort of come back in the form of an Iron Man game? Anyway, it happens. I'd be happy to fly around in a mech suit one more time. As always, this might go into a members debrief, so make sure you're a member on the channel if you want to join those members-only streams. Hit subscribe, hit the bell button, and I'll see you in the next video.